we can just give you a bit of an overview around how today's discussion will go. It's really going to be providing, valuable insights into navigating global expansion from handling logistics to building an international customer base. So I'll start by introducing our guests, then it'll be a Q&A format, and then we're going to open the floor for questions. So you'll have at least 10 to 15 minutes at the end of this to ask any questions. And this is being recorded, so we will be uploading it to the Folklore Hub, which is our content center, after this, so that you can play it back. So let's get started. Emefa, thank you for
hmm
joining us today. To get started, could you just give us a little bit of intro about you and your journey to launching your brand?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me. I'm so excited. I love sharing my stories. So thank you for giving me the platform to do so.
Sure.
So yeah, I'm Emefa. I'll kind of start and go a little bit backwards to give a bit more context, but I launched ISRAELLA KOBLA in 2019, soon after I graduated from George Brown College here in Toronto. And I originally didn't plan to launch a company straight away. I had wanted to work for someone 3, 4 years, kind of learn from them and see kind of the ropes of the industry and how everything worked. But stars aligned, and I kind of just went with it and I jumped in. And I think throughout this conversation, you'll see that's a lot of been my journey, is just like jumping in, saying yes, figuring it out, and seeing how it goes. And ISRAELLA KOBLA really, I think the journey of ISRAELLA KOBLA unofficially began in 2012. I was studying civil engineering at the time. I was in school in my third year, and my brother passed away. And the company is dedicated to him. Israel is my middle name, and Kabla is his middle name. So this whole kind of journey, this whole thing has been a whole dedication to him. And I took time off from school. I went to Ghana, where I'm originally from, and one of my aunties, she has a sewing business over there. And she was teaching me. She was teaching me the ins and outs of sewing, pattern drafting, even just measuring, how to use an industrial machine, all of these things that kind of I'd always wanted to learn, but just as a side thing. At that time, fashion for me was just this thing I was interested in. I was fully committed to being an engineer, going and doing architecture, having a consulting company, which when I reflect, I feel like there's always been that entrepreneurial undertone. Not that I would have framed it that way back then, but yeah, so I kind of was learning, and it was her and my mom were surprised at how quickly I was picking things up. And they were the ones, surprisingly for African, parents, they were the ones that were kind of like, maybe you should give this a go. And I kind of just dusted it off. I wasn't really taking it too seriously. And then I left Ghana after about 2 months. I went back to England before coming back to Canada. And then I started just making things I was using myself as kind of the sample model, just making things and experimenting. There's this amazing pattern book that I was using. It's by Helen Armstrong. I forget the exact name, but I was just using that and just testing out different skills and ways of putting things together. And then when I came back I was in Ottawa at the time. I was making things for friends like graduations or birthdays, and again, just very casually. I wasn't taking it too seriously. And then, the realities of engineering took over, and I didn't touch a sewing machine for probably 4 or 5 years. So there was a big gap from that 2012, 2013 period of time until I went to fashion school in Toronto. So fast forward, I was working for about 3 years in engineering. And I just got to the point where the role I had was not what I wanted to do. And I was like, do you know what? I'm relatively young. I have minimal responsibility. Let's just see how this thing goes. I have a great fallback. So I left my job. I moved to Toronto. That's when I went to George Brown. And I loved going back as a mature student because I was so intentional with, the questions I asked in class, and like how I use the resources of the teachers and even the program in the school itself. And so I felt kind of equipped when I left from a I felt very equipped from a design standpoint and kind of from a business standpoint. And then 1 month into working after graduation, there was this opportunity to join a business accelerator. If you're in Toronto, it's called BizStart. It's run by Youth Employment Services. And that was so transformational for me because I entered that as like, oh, I'm just a designer, entrepreneur. Ew, I don't like that. What's that? Like, I felt so uncomfortable calling myself an entrepreneur. But
Yeah.
I joined a bit late. So 5 months, I think it was Monday to Friday or Monday to Thursday, you're working on your business plan, you're working on launching your business. And it wasn't for fashion specifically, which at that period of time, I think was good because you're looking at things holistically from how am I going to make money from this venture, whatever it is, whatever industry you're in. Um, so I did that, and that was kind of the beginning of joining a bunch of different accelerators in the city. So I did Business in the Streets was another one. I joined the Fashion Zone, which has been like really pivotal in kind of getting my brand out there and started from a resources standpoint, from a connection standpoint. And then obviously we all know the pandemic happened. For me, I took that kind of downtime to figure out my pricing, figure out my like systems. And I'm a very, I think the engineering background helped me so much in kind of having systems and having like a very structured kind of protocol. It came naturally to me in that sense. So even just how we were going to name our pieces, how we were going to like assign codes. I don't think right at the beginning I did that, but I was setting up the templates because we had the time in the pandemic. And I'm grateful for that downtime because I just had this conversation recently actually. And if not for that pause, I would have just hopped onto the rat race of two collections a year. Three, oh, we have to do three. Okay, three collections a year. Pump, 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 pump. Meanwhile, I have like 1,000 followers. I have no audience. I'm bringing
Yeah.
out newness when nobody's really checking for that newness, right? So I didn't release a new collection for I think it took 3 years. I had the same collection, and for people who don't know my pieces, our pieces, I say they're fashionable, but they're timeless. They're not trendy. They're really fashionable pieces, but whether you release it in 2018, whether you release it in 2024, that relevance is still there. And that's I don't know if it was an intentional approach I had, but just by the way I dress and what my influences are on my designs and sense of style, I don't chase that kind of hype. So I was like, why am I putting that pressure on myself when there's no demand for that pressure right now. So yeah, so the pandemic is where I got all of those things kind of situated. And then coming out of the pandemic, I also used it as a great opportunity to network with, publications. There was a lot of attention on Black-owned businesses as well. So TV features, magazine features, and really kind of cultivating those relationships as well. So then coming out of the pandemic, that's when I got an opportunity. And let me fast rewind a little bit. We had our graduate fashion show at George Brown, I again used that as a networking opportunity. I got email signups. I connected with someone who at the time was working at there's a department store here called Holt Renfrew. It's a luxury department store. And I connected with a buyer from there. So coming out of the pandemic, I wanted to just see, what the appetite was for my brand in the market. So I reached out, set up a meeting. I took all of my pieces in a suitcase. I went to meet up with Imran was his name. He's moved on to another company now, but I took all my pieces and we went through the collection and he gave me so much detailed feedback on, the styling, the finishing, the range in the collection, all of these things that from a buyer's perspective, because I could look at my stuff like, this is amazing. I love it, right? But that's me, of course, I'm biased. Um, and so, yeah, so then I had that conversation with him, took so many notes, and really tried to kind of just keep that in the back of my mind. And then he
And
ended up,
quick question, just to
yeah,
interrupt for a bit. What were some of the questions that you asked when you had that opportunity to meet with him to get that feedback from a buyer?
yeah. First of all, the amount of pieces in the collection, was that a good kind of range to even present to people? The diversity in the collection with regards to, tops and pants and uh dresses, all of those things. Another thing that came up was the ease of wearing, like where are people wearing these things? That was a huge thing, is that I didn't really think about that. It's like, okay, well, this top is nice, this goes with the collection, but when you really think of it from the retailer's perspective, they're buying based on where their customer is gonna, who their customer is going, the customer is going to purchase, and where they're going to wear it to, and then how they're also going to align that and merchandise that on the floor as well. So that was something I didn't ask him, but that's something that came up as well, is like really thinking, and he kind of broke it down into almost like this kind of matrix of these touch points that you have, even in terms of colorways as well. You have all of these. I had like this custom print in the collection, but then, yeah, it's custom, it's amazing, but then some people are very overwhelmed by print as well sometimes, and making sure you have enough kind of grounding pieces. So that kind of easy, um, safe piece, right? Like be it the color, be it the style. At the time, I had no stretch pieces in the collection as well. That again
Mm.
was another thing that came up. That was kind of unknown territory for me. Everything was super structured, um, all woven, no stretch. So yeah, I would say those are some of the things that came up at that point. Also, hanger appeal. That was a huge thing that I didn't think of as well. I don't know if I even had hanger loops and things like that in all of my pieces at the time. I I was just like, oh, but it looks good. They see the picture, they see the piece, but it's like if your thing is like slumping on the rack, maybe someone's not even going to give it the opportunity on that we react so viscerally to things, right? And so yeah, it was so many different things that I hadn't considered beyond these are good pieces, these are quality pieces. There's so much more to it that he highlighted for me.
And your goal initially when you started the
Hmm.
brand, was it initially like, I want to make a wholesale brand, I want to make a D2C brand, or what was your initial goal when you decided to launch the brand?
My goal was world domination. And it was to
Love that.
go, sorry.
I said, I love that. Same.
Yeah. I wanted to be everywhere. Like I wanted to do wholesale. I didn't actually want to sew the stuff myself. And then again, because of the pandemic, I remember having a conversation with a friend, and that's kind of where the inception of, because we do our things made on demand, even with our wholesale now, we don't make and hope to sell. We make what is ordered, right? So
Even for
even with the
D2C?
retailers. D2C,
Okay.
wholesale, we still, some things we do in small batches, like we'll cut, but we won't sew until it's ordered.
Okay.
Styles that we know for sure, like things that we've had a history with, and we know that always it's going to sell. So then, yeah, that I kind of was like, well, factories luckily, before I put a deposit down for a factory that was going to do samples for us, um, the pandemic happened, everyone was shutting down. And then it's like, okay, you've not put into place a marketing strategy. So you're not going to have 100 customers off the bat. Can you, have the time to make the orders here and there? Absolutely. Right. I think that's a huge thing, is maximizing your skill set, maximizing the resources, be them you, be them what's around before, I think a lot of times we're like, oh, but how am I going to manage this? But you don't even have the thing to manage, you're like worrying about
Exactly.
these things and
Hmm.
issues and problems before they've even arisen. Um, and so, yeah, so I was like, I want to go wholesale. I want to be in the States. I want to be in the UK. I want to be everywhere, Australia as well at that time too. And that was the goal. But again, the pandemic slowed that down. I started really slow and I just focused by, I wouldn't say by choice necessarily, by default, I focused in the local area, right? And when I reflect back, that was so good because there's so much to learn. There's so many kinks to iron out in your business operations, even just communicating that things are made on demand, making sure people understand that, making sure, especially in this climate where we're so used to like Amazon Prime, everything arrives the next day, that night, whatever it is, it's like making sure people understood that. At that time, it was less common. I think now it's become a lot more common. And there's a lot more understanding around that from a slow fashion sustainability standpoint as well. But yeah, that was kind of the initial plan, was to be everywhere, go wholesale. I was always reaching out to people on LinkedIn. I was, Googling like Nordstrom's email format, and then
Yeah.
finding some, I was doing all of those things that I'm sure a lot of us have done, to no avail, like there was no kind of uptake. And even highlighting things in that area where things could have been improved, it was imagery. Make sure your imagery is on point. Make sure, even if you're reaching out, give them what your pricing is. In the beginning, my pricing was so low because I was like, oh, okay, it took me a few hours to make this. This is the cost plus the fabric. That's the price. I wasn't
Yeah.
planning for, okay, what's the retail price? What are your markups? What are the retailers' margins that they want? I didn't know any of those things. So again, when I say that the course that I was forced into was so beneficial, when I look back, it's go slow, learn as you go, build gradually. Especially if you're doing it kind of, you're bootstrapping it as well.
Yes.
I'm speaking from the bootstrapping perspective. If you
Mhm.
have funding, I can't speak to that, but there's a lot more that you can do a lot faster. It
Yeah.
comes with its own challenges. I'm very aware, but I speak from the bootstrapping perspective.
And so you started having some of those meetings locally, like with like Holt Renfrew. You started getting some like local press. And so is that what kind of started driving your D2C business locally?
Yeah, I would say that because we never have really, maybe we've run like one ad or something like
Mhm.
that. And it was really like one dress that started kind of making us be recognized a bit more, and it was our Dalma dress. I call it the pandemic dress.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I think getting those features and sharing those on socials, and stylists reaching out as well. I think all of those, they did, it wasn't like, oh my God, we're like inundated with sales now, but it was all kind of like part of the baby steps in building things. Um, and which was great too, because getting that feedback as well from customers, because I have the time to like email you and check in, like, did you like your piece? Like, I'm not
Mhm.
you know, it's me. Like I'm talking to you. Like I don't, at the time, it's not like, oh, okay, let me have five other people employed. It's like, no, like I'd love to hear your feedback. I'm the founder, whatever it is. And so that was, yeah, great to use that to inform, not at the time, but future kind of designs and things like that.
And then you got your first major retailer in Canada. Can you speak to how that happened?
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to Imran, the buyer I'd met that used to work at Holt Renfrew, he had ended up moving to the Bay temporarily, and we had reconnected. And at the time, they were prepping to launch their marketplace. And no, sorry, let me rewind. They had wanted to buy face masks because there was a time, remember, we were all wearing face
Yes.
masks. Um, And so he had reached out to potentially sell to my face mask to them wholesale. That didn't end up working out, but through that kind of reconnection, we and let me just pause for a second here as well. I think there's so much power in checking in on people when they cross your mind. At the he had crossed my mind. I reached out like, hey, I thought of you. How are you doing? I hope all is well. And that's what sparks, because he hadn't been thinking of ISRAELLA KOBLA, thinking of me, but that kind of check-in led to, oh wait, we've got this thing going on. Let me connect you. And I think a big part of entrepreneurship is like networking and genuinely so. It's not chasing like I need something, let me reach out, but it's just maintaining when you connect with people, maintaining that relationship. Because down the line, maybe it doesn't lead to anything, but maybe it does, right?
Yes.
And so he put me in touch with them. We launched on their marketplace and we were able to even do our made on demand. They said they wanted to test that with us and see how it went. And in the beginning, it was a little bit slow, but then there came a time when we did one of their sales. We participated in one of their sales, and that just took things to a whole different level. And from that, I used the opportunity to kind of leverage an in-store partnership. So I kind of used the data that we were receiving from their marketplace. And I had reached out to someone on their team that I heard about this concession kind of model that they have. And I reached out and they were, again, it's like, sure, we can test it with you. I think um, another lesson is that you'll be surprised at what people will say yes to if you just ask. And I think
Closed
it's really
mouths don't get fed. That's what they say. Closed
100%,
mouths don't
a
get fed.
hundred
Yep.
percent. And the thing is, open mouths may not get fed too, but there's a chance that they will, and why not explore that, right? I think it's so important to get comfortable just hearing people say no. Like, yes, you can be disappointed. Yes, you can be upset. Feel that, go through that, don't dwell on it, and just like, okay, well, what next? What can I try next? And so then we launched in three of their more remote or suburban stores, let me say. And I was observing the sales, I was observing kind of the other brands that we were around, and we were the most expensive by like double or maybe even triple in some points of the brands we were around. And I was like, do you know what? This isn't kind of working out in that way. So then I approached them again and I'm like, hey, is it possible that we could maybe navigate into some of your more central locations? And again, let's test it. Let's see. Why not? Um, and so then we moved into the more central, so Yorkdale Mall, Sherway Gardens, and Eaton Center. And again, that it was such a good fit. It made so much sense because now we were surrounded by brands, and this has been a big takeaway. And I think it's really important to always analyze these things and note down what you're observing, right? So I was observing, okay, in the first three stores, we were so much more expensive. People were put off by the price. It's not about the product or the value, but where we were situated, it just didn't make sense. So then when we moved into these other three locations, now we were in the middle, but matching the quality of like the luxury brands we were surrounded by. And that was like our sweet spot. That was like things were selling out, things were, okay, we have to replenish. And I wouldn't have, known or expected. But again, because I was like observing what was happening and noting the difference, like what was the difference here? It's that, okay, the price point was way more aligned, but we were also providing value for that money as well. So then, yeah, so then that's how we got into Hudson's Bay. And that process was, again, I'm so glad that it started locally because
Yep.
we had to get, our UPC codes, we had to get our SKUs, we had to print barcode, like all of these things that I don't understand. Like, how does me giving you a code automatically tell you that, okay, it's scanned? Like, there was so much that you don't think of that I had to wrap my head around. And one thing about me is I'm gonna ask the questions.
Yep.
I'm confident in what I do know, that I'm okay admitting what I don't know. And half the time, no one is gonna make you feel silly or make you feel, whatever it is for asking the questions. They'd rather you ask, they clarify it before they're now trying to course correct mistakes. And they were amazing to partner with in that capacity. They really kind of walked me through, explained. They had people that I could reach out to. And again, it was like adding to my knowledge. A lot of it is like, okay, I see how this operates. And you speak to one person, they throw some words in there. You're like, huh, what does that mean? then you go into the next conversation, you throw those words in there. Like it's like you're
Yep.
slowly building your knowledge base, right? Because you're asking and people are giving you that information.
Okay. And so you have now established yourself as Canadian dominant. So now we're going back to world domination, right?
Yeah, let's
So
let's keep let's keep moving on the train.
so when did you decide, all right, it's time for me to go outside of Canada, and where and how did you know it was time, and where did you decide to focus next?
Yeah, so I don't know if I knew for sure it was time, but it had always been on the agenda. Like that had always been part of the plan.
How long
And
were you just operating like mostly in Canada, I guess?
so I would say we launched in 2019, but I would say we became like a real business in 2021, and it was
Hmm.
2021 and 2022. So two
Gotcha.
years in
Okay.
just in Canada. And
Mhm.
then but even in that time, because I knew that I like ultimately I felt my stuff would resonate deeply in the US, I
Okay.
changed my website. I changed our
Mhm.
Shopify site to USD. I started kind of laying the found and again because we were now starting to get more attention and more customers, I was like before it gets um way bigger, let me make sure I make those changes now versus
Mhm.
okay, people have become accustomed to our pricing, accustomed to all of these things, and then now all of a sudden you're changing things. So
Mhm.
I kind of preemptively started laying that foundation in just very small and slight ways.
Mhm.
Even just observing what people like the brands that I felt we were adjacent to, was our pricing making sense and aligned with them as well. I do so even with our pricing, it's the pricing is based on what it costs because we make everything locally. We make it in Toronto. Um, and so I do the pricing and then I'll adjust based on the perceived value. So say for example, a dress and a top, similar style are coming up relatively the same because a lot of the times the length doesn't necessarily add a crazy amount of extra
Mhm.
labor. Yes, fabric, but not necessarily labor. And then I would kind of adjust and say, okay, if I was a customer walking in, would I see that top in that dress and think the top is worth almost the same as the dress? So some things you kind of adjust, you take a little bit of less profit margin in some areas and some a little bit more. So overall, it kind of balances out to a certain level. So I started again, like making sure those things made sense and made sure that they were aligned. And then I started now reaching out to stylists in the US, started reaching out to publications in the US, started observing which showrooms people, the brands that I like, where they were showcasing their stuff. This was all kind of just in the background. I wasn't necessarily acting on anything now, but I was just collecting that information for the eventual kind of launch. And then I think that's where the folklore comes into the story. Hey, um, yeah, like I think that the first real opportunity I got to go to the States and kind of present the brand was Coterie. So that was, I believe that was September 2022, I
Yeah, I think
think.
we started our
The first
partnership with
time,
them then. Yeah.
yeah. So that was the first time, and that was a really eye-opening experience for one, how to even speak about your brand. And again, I'm going to rewind a little bit. In 2021, I decided that 2022 was going to be the year of doing all the pop-ups, all the opportunities to just get the brand out there and going in with the intention of I'm doing this as a marketing initiative versus a sales initiative. And what I mean by
Hmm.
that, if the cost of registering in this pop-up, for example, is let's say $800, I'm using that as okay, well, that's something I don't have to spend on ads. If we make that from sales back, amazing. But if we get the signups, we get the brand awareness, all of that, that's a job well done. Right. And I
Yep.
think sometimes these things we have to, it's all a bit of perspective, the way we view the like our endeavors, whatever we're doing to kind of get the brand out there. sometimes if we're going in the expectation, we're going to sell out, we're going to do this, that's fantastic if you do, and you can do that. But it's also like, let me go a bit more strategically. Maybe then let's play a bit of a long game. Do I get people's emails? Do we have, QR codes and things linked to our website, linked to our Instagram? And then we kind of nurture that relationship versus must buy on site, right? That also taught me a lot about how pop-ups run and people's intentions coming to them as well. So again, like building this pool of data to just later inform decisions. Because in the beginning, I think we want to be everywhere, we want to do everything. We don't fully reason through, does this make sense for our goals? It's like, okay, there's an opportunity to show at Fashion Week, doing it, doing.
Hmm.
But it's, I think as time goes on, you realize that, okay, in this moment, does that make sense to do that? If you were to get an order, do you have the capacity to fulfill that order?
Yeah, and
There's all of these.
mhm. And
No,
I
go ahead.
remember like this was because I actually went to that coterie and I remember so we had partnered with Coterie to enable like three of our brands to be able to participate for free. And I believe we like reached out to you very last minute and you were like, oh
Yeah,
yeah, I want you got on a plane with all
yeah,
of your products and you came
100%.
over to New York and you were
Yeah.
like, I want to be here. And actually the other brands were like, hey, you could just send stuff. You don't have to be here because we were gonna have you were like, no, no,
No.
I want to be here. And I thought that that was like that is when I knew I was like, oh, she's gonna be successful because you just were like, okay, this is an opportunity. I'm gonna go take a chance on it. I saw how you even talking about your products there, like the materials you came with, and that's when I was like, oh, okay. I know what's gonna
Yeah.
happen here. Yeah. And
But
so
even,
and so yeah. And so I'm curious around so like you've had that first interaction and
yeah.
with like, okay, I've done a trade show now. Like what were the next steps that you took where it's like this is going to be my strategy now to get to either a big retailer, get to boutiques, or to just start getting those direct to consumer orders in the US? What was like your
Yeah,
next big thing that hit?
I think that highlighted to me that I wanted to go because I think I had kind of was considering focusing D2C and building things up that way, but that experience highlighted to me that I really wanted to focus on the wholesale first approach. And what I'll say is because again, we make everything in house, there's so much work that goes into that. There's so much on the ground work that goes into that. Whereas, for example, if we were making things elsewhere, there'd be a lot more time to focus on our marketing, our socials,
Mhm.
all of these things. So, because that's the bed I've chosen to lie in for various reasons, I was like, okay, wholesale makes sense, right? It's kind of casting a wider net over things, and again, viewing that as a marketing kind of strategy. So I would say after that, that's when then I signed on to the Folklore, and it's like these opportunities to do the showrooms and things like that to present the brand. That's when I was like, okay, this makes so much sense because like I said, I tried reaching out to a Nordstrom, a Selfridges, all of these people before, and now seeing how the influx of emails these buyers get on a daily, hourly basis, I'm like, of course they weren't gonna like respond my email, like little old me in Toronto, Emefa, who's Emefa? But there's such power in going through a showroom, a platform like the Folklore, because it's power in numbers, right? They're coming
Mhm.
now. It's like almost like a pre-vetted assortment of brands, let's say.
Mhm. Yep.
So if a Nordstrom, let's just use Nordstrom because I know them as an example, they're more likely to trust a Folklore who has done their due diligence, they've already built their relationship with you, than a random brand that they have no idea about. So that's when I was like, okay, I'm gonna, work with the Folklore and see how this goes. And yeah, so then last year, was it last year? Yeah, 2023 is the first kind of showroom that I participated in with you guys. And all of those pop-up experiences, all of those things were real preparation for that experience. Because again, knowing how to, the buyers, they're so busy, they're so hard to read, like they're just coming in. if you know down pat like what you're offering, what's special, what your price point is, all of those things, and you're ready, it's like 5 minutes you have to kind of grasp their attention. So I think having to speak about my brand so much in the lead up to that, I was like, oh, I know what I'm saying. I know what people need to know about my company. I know again what my customers have also, what the key things that they've gravitated to, what have been some of our popular styles, and being able to talk to how that's been, because that was now a new collection, how that's been translated into this new collection. Um, yeah, so that's kind of where things kind of got started.
Okay. And so through the showrooms, you were able to meet a bunch of the retailers. You were able to meet those people that you were, emailing, the Nordstroms and the
Yeah.
Saxes. And so then you end up getting picked up by Nordstrom. So
Woo!
how many conversations was that? How many times had they seen it, through the showrooms?
Mhm.
And, just talk about that relationship.
Yeah, so they had so yeah, so I'd met, I think there was three buyers that came around to our stall, and they visibly were, they were noticeably were in more kind of engaged than some of the other retailers. So I felt good, but again, you can't fully read them. And so the three that I met were not the buyers for my department. So when I got back to Toronto, that's when I found out that they're interested in having a follow-up meeting. And so these buyers, they wanted to see the pieces, meet me as the founder, understand the brand a little bit. So we had the initial meeting at the showroom, and then there was a video conference call. And then in that call is when I think they had already decided that they had wanted to go ahead. And then after that, that's when we kind of started the conversations around pricing, around expectations for them, as what the expectations they have of the brands to be considered successful with Nordstrom. Again, I'm just going to use Nordstrom as an example because that's what I know, and what the if there was any adjustment for pricing, because I at the time had gone in with, okay, well, we're going to do a 50% markup, but every retailer has their own kind of minimums that they're working with. So then there was a little bit of back and forth of, okay, do we increase the retail price? Do we increase or decrease the wholesale price? So we had a little bit of back and forth. That was all done via email. And then we went into like the onboarding process. And let me tell you, that is the most intense process I've ever been. And again, every retailer is different. But going way, way back to those templates and the codings and all of those things that I'd set up back in the pandemic, those came in clutch at this point and were so, so necessary, because I think before you enter that kind of partnership, it's so important to have your own internal system, because otherwise you're kind of just jumping and making things up on the fly. If you have no, I'll use how we operate as an example. There's a specific letter code for tops, there's a specific letter code for pants, all of the different kind of categories that we offer. There's a numbering convention and there's a collection convention. So now when you get into onboarding with these retailers, it is Excel sheets, Excel sheets, Excel sheets. And say, for example, all you have is numbers, everything is just going to look like the same thing. So having those systems in place, okay, I slip these things into their system, and then obviously they have their own specific protocols, but you're not just adapting things to the way they operate. You've got
Mhm.
your standard template, and you add and you subtract based on which retailers that you're working with. So I think that's super, super, super important to establish if you plan to go wholesale. If you
Yeah.
focus D2C, that's your own kind of prerogative. But knowing that you want to go wholesale, and you're not going to know everything as well, like you figure it out and you adapt as you go, but it's important to just have some form of system, have some kind of historic data as well, because even for them, they're like, where have your customers been coming from? They
Hmm.
see these things, and I think it's important. to see them as partners, right? That you're not solely leaning on them. Yes, I'm using these wholesale partnerships as a marketing kind of strategy to get to a wider audience. But as much as you want from them, they also want from you. They can look at pieces and be like, we think it's going to sell, but they can't guarantee that. So if you've got like a history of information, or you have, even if it was not even sales, but at a pop-up, a lot of people were gravitating to and trying on a certain thing. All of these things can influence, okay, well, we'll kind of go deeper on this particular style based on the feedback that you're giving us. And maybe we'll experiment a little bit with this
Yeah.
other style,
And
So,
yeah, and I want to tell everybody to make sure that they put some questions in the Q&A because I'm going to ask one last question and then we're going to start asking taking audience answers. But so okay, so you've been able to break through in the US from a wholesale perspective.
hmm
So now how have you been able to make that translate from a D2C standpoint as well? And if you're now taking on, the burden of doing D2C with
hmm
US brands, US customers, how is like the logistics been when it comes to like importing? Have you ever found like that there's difficulties from a price standpoint from like a just how to get it into the country?
Yeah, so I can talk about the wholesale logistics and then the D2C logistics. And one of the great things, and again, going back to wholesale, viewing it as a marketing initiative, very few retailers are going to buy your entire collection, right? And so for me, I make sure, yes, Nordstrom give me tags. I also put our tags on. Even like, are you going to add like a little thank you card? Are you going to add some form of branding to allow people to get to know your brand outside of that retailer? I've seen, based on being present in Nordstrom, and people are actually able to touch and feel, right? Because we're online, but we're also in the stores, and we have like a higher price point. So people see the quality, they feel it, and then now they get curious. What else does this brand sell? So I've seen, as a result of us being in Nordstrom, I've seen a big, I think almost more of our customers now are coming from the US than Canada at the moment, solely based on us being in Nordstrom, because we're not doing any, at the moment, any advertising in the States specifically. So that cost of marketing is proving valuable in that sense. And then from a logistics standpoint, unbeknownst to me, I didn't realize that we make all of our stuff in Canada, but specifically for clothing, there are other clauses there. So when we fulfilled our first order with Nordstrom, got to the border, was hit with, I won't even mention the amount, but a disgusting amount of duties that I wasn't prepared for. It's a different thing if you factored it into your pricing. In my head, I'm like, okay, our clothing is made in Canada. There's a free trade agreement in place. We're good. Um, I almost couldn't fulfill that order. That's how bad that was, because we weren't prepared for that. Thank God that all of that was able to go through. And now I've been working with a customs broker. The company I work with is actually Mohawk Global. They're amazing. And we've now developed kind of a strategy in place, and that's been factored in to pricing. So yeah, I would say even before you finalize your pricing for these markets, really look into, for your specific product, even if there's trade agreements, whatever there is, for your specific products, what is the protocol? What is the process? When it gets to the border, what's going to happen? A lot of these customs brokers will have like initial consultation with you. They're not going to charge for that. Before you then say to a Nordstrom, to a Saks, to a whoever, these are my landed costs, as in duties paid for, delivered to the country. Before you finalize that, make sure you factor these things into your pricing, because the percentage, depending on the volume of the order, can cripple you, if you're not ready for that. So that's on the wholesale perspective. I would give the advice of really speak to, know what your products are, know what your like fabric contents are, all of this, and speak to a customs broker before you finalize your pricing, before you put your line sheet together, all of these things. Um, from a D2C perspective, there's a lot of, I know in Canada and I know in the States as well, these cross-border services. So I'm able to fulfill orders. They essentially drive it to the border in the States. The company I use is called Stallion Express. There's another one called Chit Chat. So for shipments and for returns as well, while time is flying, I'm gonna wrap this up. Um, for I use them and they drive it to the border and they ship it almost like a local order. So I'm able to give my US customers sometimes even a cheaper rate than it is to ship within Canada, which is crazy, but that's the reality. And then for returns as well, because there's duties as well. So we kind of charge a convenience fee, but the convenience fee is significantly less than what they would have to pay for duties. So we use that to help fulfill those orders. And we just make sure we also communicate our timelines as well, because that's a big thing I've realized the difference between the US and Canada. I think in Canada, there's a real understanding for slow fashion made on demand. We know we're not going to get it instantaneously. In the US, I place my order at 2. Why is it not at my door at 8 p.m.? Like
Yeah.
you're like guilty. There's
Yep.
a need for that kind of education on that standpoint. And so all over our website is there, in our confirmation email it's there. And even still people will reach out and be like, hey, I ordered this and I was expecting it in 2 days. Why is it not here? So that's been another big lesson in how you kind of educate your customer and let them know about your processes as well.
Okay. Well, this was fantastic. I'm excited for you to answer some audience questions right now. So first question
Excuse
from
me.
Sharon is, at what point did you start approaching factories, and how many did you
Mm.
start with, seeing that as a small brand, you have a small budget and not a lot of factories are willing to take you on?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do everything in Toronto. I'd say 50 to 60% we do in-house, and then the remainder we work with local manufacturers. And I started approaching these manufacturers when I started changing my US pricing, knowing eventually I wanted to go into wholesale and knowing I'm very particular about our quality. I started vetting these people. I started seeing what they were good at, because there's blazers, there's a manufacturer I'd go to. For knits, there's a manufacturer I'd go to. And I started kind of getting them to do samples, getting an understanding for their pricing, the machines that they had. So yeah, I did it pretty early on, but I didn't commit to it early on. But I knew if an order comes through in a large order, I knew who to go to. And it wasn't at that point that I was figuring it out and testing and trying to see who could do, 50 of these blazers and 100 of these dresses. I would start as soon as you know that you want to go into wholesale slowly, right? If the budget is constricted, start slowly. Test out 1 or 2 styles with them, see how that goes. Maybe don't give them the entire collection. Use something that has maybe a level of intricacy that if they can do that, for sure they'll be able to do the simpler one. I would start that way.
Okay, that's great. And then also, if you are a member of the Folklore Sharon, we have the Folklore Source, so you can actually go in and find vetted manufacturers and reach out to them, and the MOQs are all in there as well. So let's go to Jason. Who is gathering this data and putting together these Excel systems you mentioned? Is it just you, and do you have a team? And then a follow-up is, how did you build that team, and how many team members do you have now?
So it is me doing these Excel, but again, that's just how my mind works. Like as soon as, say, let me use Nordstrom as an example, there was so much information. I had to sit for maybe 2 days just figuring out how I wanted to translate that information and present it into Excel in a template form that I could use order after order. So that is me. But that's based on I'm a very type A kind of person. In terms of team, in the very beginning, it was just me. I was doing all the sewing, deliver like everything. I think very cliche founder's story. And then after, oh, and then when we launched with Hudson's Bay, I worked with 2 people I actually went to school with. on a contract basis. So I would cut for them, I would deliver it to them, they would sew, we'd agreed on a per piece price, and then we would they would help me with that because there came a point, and I think it's important to know where you're going and action things before you're ready, slightly before you're ready. So I started having the conversations with them. Again, like I was recording videos to walk them through how the sewing went together for these styles. So when the time came where I was inundated, I knew who to go to. Right now, I have two full-time in-house sewers. I have a marketing strategist, and I have a content creator, and I have me, and I work with various interns throughout the year as well. And then I've also partnered with about three factories in the city who, when we don't have the capacity or they have machinery that we don't have, they kind of take the load on that.
Okay.
Did I
And
answer everything? I don't know.
yes, you did. That was great.
Okay.
And then we have how many pieces does a Nordstrom order for each style on average, and how many stores are you in, and who decides that?
They decide everything, but what I would say is learning my lesson from the first order, and really being realistic with your capacity. The second order, I reduced some quantities. There was, the first order, I shipped things, fabrics straight from Asia to be able to arrive on time that they could produce. It was a very specific color, and it was such a distinct color for that collection that had sold out. So make sure you check those things as well, and make sure there's availability. Uh, and sorry, can you remind me what the question was? I forgot the second part.
How many stores are you in now?
Okay, we're in 8 stores and online. They determine where you are, but again, it's going back to if you've got a D2C client base in the US and you're like, we get a lot of orders from this particular region. And I'll speak again for Nordstrom, I don't know if this is everyone, they are receptive to hearing that. They want to know because ultimately they want you to be successful because you make money, they make money, everybody grows together. So yeah, they ultimately pick in the beginning, but they also asked me in the beginning, where we've had traction. And at that time, US was kind of slow. So I just gave them the data that I had, and also where I wanted to be as well. And I think they picked great spots for us.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, we can't answer the rest of the questions that are here, but I appreciate you for taking the time out to speak with us. So many gems were dropped. I am, again, always impressed by your journey. I'm so
Thank you.
grateful that you've allowed us to be a part of it. And yeah, amazing work. And for everyone who wants to follow you, learn more about the brand, where should they find you?
Yeah, Instagram is probably the best place. I would just put both the brand and my personal one in there as well. And yeah, feel free to like reach out and any questions and things like that. I will always do my best to answer fully. Oh, I think I typed, oh yeah. Oh no, I typed it to host and panelists. I don't know if everyone can see that.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Perfect. So yes, appreciate you again, and make sure to follow the brand and the amazing founder, and then make sure to follow us at the Folklore. And again, anybody who's not a brand currently, we are doing 20% off for the first 3 months. So reach out to membership at thefolklore.com and just let them know that you attended this webinar. And if you want to see our past webinars, make sure that you log into your membership portal, and you can see all of our past webinars, including this one, as well as our workshops. And I appreciate you all again, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.